Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation with Randstad RiseSmart on the latest severance research and how you measure up. I'm Melissa Place, Editor-in-Chief of Employee Benefit News, and joining me today is Lindsay Witcher, Managing Director. Hi, Lindsay. If you want to take a couple minutes to share a bit about yourself.
Hi, Alyssa. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for having me and really excited for the conversation today. So I've been part of the Randstad RiseSmart business for just shy of 13 years. I think it's actually my anniversary next week. So I've been here quite a long time, and I currently manage our business globally. So all of our career transition, outplacement, career development, and career coaching solutions for all of our customers around the world. So excited to be here today to talk more about severance, all things severance, and what we found in our research and some best practices for all of you here listening today.
Great. And we have a lot to get into today, so let's take a look at our agenda. Today we're going to go through headlines from the research. We're going to look at a benchmark for severance, the importance of redeployment, various insights and takeaways, and then again at the end we'll have a question and answer session. Please feel free throughout the chat to put your questions in the Q&A box and we will get to them at the end. So Lindsay, just to get started, can you tell us about the global severance research that Randstad RiseSmart conducted?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. So 2023 was our fifth since 2015, and we surveyed a cross-section of HR and procurement leaders from both large and small organizations. What we did was really ask them about their severance practices. What have they changed? What have they added since last we spoke to them? What are they thinking about adding? What are they thinking about in the future? Because we want to make sure that there is a really good snapshot of severance best practices and how important this topic is to an employee's benefit package. It goes without saying, and it's constantly evolving. And all of our customers, everyone we talk to out in the market, is really hungry for more data to understand how they stack up and how they compare. So that's really what drives us to continue on now for this fifth iteration of doing our severance research. Now, for everyone on the call, we will send you a copy of the full 2023 report following our session today, so keep an eye out for that. And I look forward to digging into a few more details. And anyone who's interested in data for your particular sector, your particular company size, feel free to reach back out to us and we can provide you with some of the analysis we have on some of those deeper insights.
That's great. Yeah, so let's dive in. What are some of the things that really stood out for you from this latest research?
So it won't come as a surprise to anyone that 2023 was a big year for layoffs. The biggest cause, according to our research, was cited as overhiring. It was pretty much a repercussion of the scramble for talent that happened just following the pandemic. And a lot of companies really misjudged how sustainable the rapid growth they were experiencing during that time was. And when it finally sort of leveled off, they realized they need to make some changes and cut back. Not to mention, in addition to that factor, at that moment in time, we also began to see some of the additional economic uncertainty out there in the market. And so a combination of overhiring sort of during the COVID time, the economic uncertainty following that time, and just everything that has really changed for organizations in the last couple of years really led to the very high rates of layoffs in 2023, according to our research. I also found it interesting, if you look here at this chart, that 90% of organizations still expect to take some sort of downsizing action this year in 2024. And while things are in some cases improving economically and moving in the right direction, there's still a lot of uncertainty. And while our research shows that layoffs due to a downturn, strategic shifts, or to reduce labor costs are expected to ease this year, you'll see there on that fourth row that we're expecting to see an increase in layoffs due to automation or AI, or what I would bucket under evolving business strategies. That's going to be the next frontier, I think, of companies having changes within their business, less driven by those factors we mentioned and more driven by evolutions of their strategies as it relates to AI. What's really encouraging, though, is that by far the most common downsizing action, both last year and this year, isn't immediately jumping into layoffs. It's offering redeployment to employees affected by change. That's really, really good news and a trend that I'm excited to see continue to improve. It helps to retain talent. It helps people to upskill and reskill and find new roles within your organization. It reduces your hiring and severance costs. Redeployment has a tremendous amount of upside for any business. And I'm glad to see that more and more companies are thinking more purposefully about it. I think we have a ways to go. We'll share some more about that later in the call today, but I'm glad to see it's more of a topic. And then the last thing that I would note from the research was that 83% of the organizations that we talked to have reviewed and updated their severance packages in the last 3 years, or currently have changes underway. Another 13% are planning to make changes this year. So if you are on this call and you haven't yet reviewed your severance practices within your organization, it is absolutely a great time to do so. And hopefully by joining this call today, we'll be able to give you some pointers as to the things you might be thinking about, what the competition is doing, and really ultimately what a competitive severance package looks like today.
Yeah, thanks for going through that. Obviously, a lot going on. When you're looking at severance packages overall, what are some of the changes that you are seeing organizations start to make to those?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as you can see here, really every element of severance packages has been changed or updated according to those who responded to our survey. These that you're looking at here are global results. Outplacement services being the most commonly looked at. What we've seen is that over the last year or so, a lot of people have looked at this topic. And I think companies have begun to observe how their peers are coming under a lot of scrutiny from employees, and layoffs are becoming more and more public. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the articles and the news around people recording their layoffs virtually and putting them on TikTok, and just, people are very transparent on LinkedIn today saying, hey, I was part of the layoff at ABC company today, looking for my next opportunity, so on and so forth. So for a long time, layoffs were something that were sort of really swept under the rug. People were not talking about them. People were not advertising them, so to speak. That has completely flipped on its head. People are very much out there talking about how it went, being really transparent about how things are handled. And I think for that reason, and many others, a lot of companies have revisited how they're handling not just the layoffs themselves, but the services and the benefits that they're offering employees as a result of those layoffs. And more are providing outplacement. It's a really fundamental part of what organizations can do to ease the transition for the people who are impacted within their business, but also demonstrate compassion for those individuals and, frankly, reduce their risk of a negative fallout following a situation such as that. If you look at the other more popular areas here on the chart, people are changing. If you look at the other more popular areas, people are changing in their severance arrangements. Most are financial, cash payouts, payment of bonuses, help with financial planning or health benefit continuance, but also support for education and retraining. That's another key area to help people move on, and ties back into potentially that redeployment conversation, but also generally speaking, just a responsibility of employers to make sure that the people that they are letting go out into the job market do have relevant skills to be employable. And there's a workforce sustainability component and obligation by employers in that area as well that I think we're seeing show up more in the data.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely uplifting to see some compassion in this process, because this is obviously not something anybody on either side really wants to go through. But even despite all these changes, perhaps unsurprisingly, you found that there's still a lot of negative sentiment around layoffs, both from people who get laid off and from those who remain at at their employer. So can you talk a bit about that and some of the trends that you found?
It's such an important topic, and it's one I'm extremely passionate about. I think that oftentimes when business leaders are planning for and executing a layoff, they're thinking very much about the people who are leaving their organization and what is the risk and how do we mitigate that and so on and so forth. They're forgetting that there's a hugely important population within the organization that they need to stay following that layoff. And not only do they need them to stay, they need them really firing on all cylinders. They need them engaged. They need them committed. They need them to probably be doing a little bit more work than they were doing before. And when layoffs are not handled well, and it's not considered, that group is not considered your staying employees, you can see a really, really negative impact on the motivation, the productivity, your reputation with the employees that remain after a restructure. it cannot be underestimated how huge an impact a layoff will have on your existing workforce. And I do think most business leaders underestimate that impact. I think the key thing here is that while there is a hard cost to severance in terms of how you treat those employees that are leaving, there's also let's call it an invisible cost among the employees who remain. And they are watching how you treat those employees who are leaving. First of all, how is the notification handled? How are you doing that? Second of all, what sort of benefits are being given to those employees that are leaving? But even more importantly, did you as an organization do everything that you could to avoid the layoff in the first place, right? Sometimes layoffs are unavoidable, but there are things that you can do as a business to help mitigate them. Make sure that you are offering those redeployment alternatives. Make sure that you are looking at the other levers within your business to control your costs during a difficult time. So if in fact you do get to the point where you are having to have a layoff, employees that are staying see and can say, you know what, I'm not happy about this, but I do feel like our leadership did what they could to avoid it. And therefore I can be more understanding of the situation that we find ourselves in. You'll also, through some of those things that I just mentioned, you'll minimize your severance costs and also the other additional intangible costs that impact your employees following a layoff. So really doing what you can before the layoff, handling the layoff really well, and then how you handle things with your staying employees afterwards can all have a big impact on the long-term sustainable strategy of your company.
So if an employer does get to that point where a layoff is unavoidable, what can you tell us about what a good severance package actually looks like and the elements that are within that?
That's a great question. And I think between just some of the best-in-class organizations that we work with here is RiseSmart, but also what we found in the study, we've really summarized what we consider to be the table stakes, minimum viable severance package, if you will, that we think you should be considering, and then what we consider to be really more best in class of an approach. And so at a minimum, you should be aiming to offer severance benefits that you can see here on the left-hand side. If you want to be really competitive and best in class, it's really these things on the right-hand side, all of which will minimize those negative impacts that we saw there on the previous slide and that we talked about a little bit today. We've started seeing more instances of severance being offered in a more equitable fashion, meaning to all employees versus just some, and employees being eligible for those severance packages or severance benefits rather from day one of their notification. Now, that might result in a marginal increase in your severance costs in a very turbulent year, but the message that you're able to give, not just to your departing employees, but your staying employees, and more importantly, or not more importantly, but equally importantly down the road, prospective employees, is really, really important. It shows that you take the time to take care of your employees, that you care deeply about their experience, both while they're there and as they're leaving. And as you are moving into a new phase of the organization, following the layoff, hopefully moving back into a growth phase, your potential employees are going to be asking you these questions. They're going to be looking at what is the severance opportunity at this organization? How do they handle this very important topic? Because where for a long time, this was not something I think most employees thought about, maybe executives, but not really below that level. Given how visible this topic has been over the last couple of years, I think we're going to see a trend of more and more employees using severance as an evaluation criteria for accepting a new role within an organization. So you can make your severance policies and how you handle these things a talent attraction lever, or you can make it something that makes talent run for the hills, right? I think there's one or two options there. And the more time you can spend on being very thoughtful about this, creating as robust and generous a severance package as possible is not only going to help you to give comfort to your existing employees for all the reasons we've spoken about, but also have a talent attraction opportunity when you're talking to people who you want to join your organization.
And I wanted to revisit the topic of redeployment, because that's actually not something that I've heard too much about, working in the benefit space. And you mentioned earlier that it's an important component in managing talent and avoiding those severance costs. So how are employers implementing these programs? What do they look like? And, what are some of the results that they're seeing?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, this is a topic I'm extremely passionate about. So thank you for asking me to talk about it a little bit more. I was happy to see in our survey that half of all organizations do expect, or did offer it last year, pardon me, and 40%, tongue twisters here, expect to do so this year. And while almost all of the organizations we surveyed felt ready and prepared to do so, less than half felt that their redeployment program was actually effective. And that's where I think we need to spend a lot more time as leaders, is getting redeployment right. And from my perspective, redeployment can start well before any idea or inkling that a layoff may need to happen is part of the conversation. And so this is where we've all heard everyone in the HR space talking about internal mobility ad nauseum. It is really, really important. Have you created within your organization a culture, a framework, a structure that allows for people to truly navigate their careers within the company? Is there mobility happening? Can people have a growth mindset, learn new skills, move from one department to another? Do you not have talent hoarding across managers and leaders, so on and so forth? So I think that when you have already a foundation of internal mobility within your organization, and it's a well understood, accepted, and even ideally celebrated topic, when it comes time for a true redeployment program, you're going to see it go a lot better. What you have to do with redeployment is it's a much faster, much more proactive type of engagement. So typically what you want to do is you know which employees or which types of employees will or may be impacted by a layoff either now or in the near future. You then proactively put the structure in place within the organization and the supporting tools and resources for those employees to be able to find that next role internally before they are exited from the organization. And that starts with being able to plan ahead, right? Being able to enact this type of process well ahead of a person's exit date. So giving them 30, 60, 90 days, sometimes more, depending on the organization, of time to look for and find that next opportunity. And there's a number of different tools and resources and processes that you can do. But getting that right, creating an environment where employees whose roles are going away truly have a chance to find something new, that's going to be a secret sauce and a real differentiator for organizations. And when we think about what services should be part of a redeployment program, you can see a few things here, and you can see why some are not very effective today because of what they're lacking. And when I look at these figures, my overwhelming sense is that employers seem to be leaving employees to fend for themselves when looking for a new role internally. Imagine, put yourself in that position. You're told your role is at risk and that you need to find another job internally or be laid off. At the very least, you would expect that your organization would notify you about open roles that are available. But that only happens in just over 1 in 3 organizations, at least according to those who responded to our survey. Just those very basic things need to be in place to enable a truly successful redeployment program. And if we look at other forms of support that we know help people move internally, most organizations are not offering people help with updating their resume, internal networking, career coaching. Similarly, with support with upskilling and reskilling, it's barely offered by half of the organizations we spoke to. And you would think that those things are really essential to be able to redeploy into another area of the business. And I think some business leaders might look at that and go, well, that's lovely, Lindsay, that you think that, but that's really expensive. Providing people with all these tools and resources, this is going to cost me a lot of money. But I would argue you're actually spending more money by not doing it, because you have, no matter what is going on, you always have open roles in the business, even when you're having a layoff, 9 times out of 10. How much cheaper it is to move that person that's already within your business into one of those open roles, both from saving on severance costs, saving on talent acquisition costs, but also the more intangible costs of retaining that tribal knowledge, retaining that experience, retaining that person's network. There is a huge upside to successfully moving people around within the organization. And so I would love to see in our next survey or subsequent surveys, companies spending a lot more time on this topic and also investing a lot more in this topic. Because while everyone is reviewing their severance packages, according to the research, there is an opportunity to also be reviewing your redeployment program and considering that as important as some of these other factors that we've talked about, not only for those very tangible reasons, but going back to the employee engagement and morale of those staying, when they see that you're making those investments, they feel really better about the company as a whole, but also their prospects in the organization should something happen to them at some point.
Great. Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen time and time again that, compassionate businesses, there's certainly a business, benefit to that as well. We're getting close to wrapping up, so I just want to invite our audience to take some time to put any questions they might have in the Q&A box. And Lindsay, why don't we start summing up, some of the key takeaways that you'd like people to take away from this research and the presentation today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it really boils down to 4 key things. There's a lot happening in this area, and I know we're covering today on the call some very high-level results of the survey. Definitely encourage you to download it, dig in, really look at the detail as it relates to what you're specifically interested in. I think you'll find a lot of value. But overall, I think these are the 4 things that I would ask everyone to keep in mind. First, I think that we should probably at this point all accept that downsizing is something that's going to continue to happen in our organizations, regardless of the economy. So much has changed and will continue to change at an accelerated pace due to the evolving technical landscape, generative AI, so on and so forth. We are going to have to be as organizations and as leaders in a constant state of renewal, or else we will not, move forward in this rapidly changing environment. And so layoffs will become, or the need to, let's say it differently. The need for layoffs isn't necessarily has to be an always-on proposition, but the need to move people around within the organization, to have people have different skill sets, to need to adjust and evolve our strategy, that is going to be business as usual moving forward. So are you going to get ahead of that and make sure that you have the right environment within the organization to retain that talent, move them around, so on and so forth? Or are you going to be in the constant throes of layoffs over and over and over again? Hopefully the former and not the latter. The second thing is, given the fact that so many organizations are reviewing their policies and their severance packages, make sure that you too are part of that group and that you are agile and ready, not just for the departing employee's experience, but again, back to that remaining employee's experience, and that you have a lot of confidence in the strategy that you are deploying across the topic, and that this is not a once every 3 to 5 year exercise. This is a constant, always on exercise to make sure that this important part of your benefits package, an important part of your employee experience, is handled with care throughout the year. The third thing, costs, reskilling and retraining people really enhances your business agility and helps solve for the talent scarcity that we're starting to see more and more out there in the market. And then finally, make sure your organization is one of constant growth, learning, and career mobility, which can allow you to avoid layoffs altogether if done correctly, as we discussed. And so following the call today, and I hope we have lots of questions I'm really excited to answer, but we will send everyone the report on our severance research. If you want more insight into your sector or similar sized organizations, please just reach out. And now I think we're ready to dive into those questions.
Great. And I also wanted to let everybody know that they will be receiving a copy of this deck as well. So let's dive into some of the questions that we have. If we have a question, if we're reviewing our severance package, what would you say are the essential components to retain or upgrade? I know you went through those 2 columns, but maybe we can just kind of revisit those essential elements there.
Yeah, it's a great question. So just off the cuff, I think first and foremost, who is getting it, right? I think that for a long time, many organizations were only really offering anything to the top echelons of the company. I would really encourage you to look at this as something that you do across all employee levels, even down to, your very entry level types of employees. I think it's really, really, really important. People are watching. So 1, it's that. 2, it's making sure that you are being as generous as possible. Based on a person's skills, based on what type of job they were doing, it can be really challenging to find a new role. And they may have to do some upskilling or reskilling in order to even be eligible for a role. The more generous you can be with the buffer you give that person between when they're leaving your organization and when they're no longer having that financial support, that becomes really, really critical. And so the more generous you can be, the better. And then I think just, again, back to some of what we talked about earlier in terms of the continuation of some other benefits, things like healthcare, things like training and reskilling opportunities, so on and so forth. those are some of the more competitive components of severance that I think more best-in-class organizations are starting to look at. So be as generous as you can with the length. Make sure you include some of those nice extras and make sure that you're offering it to everybody. And then the last little thing that I'll say is there's still many organizations who offer severance packages based on seniority or level within the organization or time within the organization, so on and so forth. I would challenge you to look at how can you create as equitable an approach to that as possible, so that even if someone had maybe not been at the organization for a super long time or was within a lower level of the organization, can you improve their severance package so that they can be more competitive, not more competitive in the market, but have more time to figure out what's next and not just consider that as something for people who are higher up in the organization.
Yeah, that's great. We actually have a question from Tracy on that topic, and she asks, are the severance package features the same for all levels of employees, including non-exempt, salaried, and executives? Should they be, and how can you make those differentiations?
Yeah, and there's differing points of view on that, right? Some people would agree or disagree with what I just said, and what I will say now is, I think that depending on the industry you're in, depending on the type of organization you have, there's a lot of factors. You don't really want to paint a broad brush on this question, but generally speaking, I think that if you can use the same lens of generosity across as much of your workforce as possible, that will make you a best-in-class employer when it comes to this topic. So while yes, typically an executive is going to get longer severance than someone who's very early career, and that's probably not a bad thing, because it does take a much longer, based on the data, it does take a much longer time for an executive, as an example, to land a new role. But it also doesn't mean that someone very early in their career is landing a new role in 4 weeks, right? So can you be more generous with those lower levels of the organization, give them a bit more time, give them a bit more benefits, so that it's maybe you're closing the gap that typically exists in these policies between those at the very top and those more within the organization. I would highly encourage you to do that. I am seeing some companies going 100% equitable in this topic, and basically saying everyone, regardless of level, gets this length of time, gets this type of package, gets these type of benefits. So whether you're an executive or you're someone earlier in your career, everyone is getting the same thing. And I'm seeing more and more of that. But that approach may not be right for every company, every industry. It really depends on a number of different factors. But those are some of the things I'm seeing, if it's helpful.
And we have a question from Roseanne about that time frame. She asks, do you see a minimum and maximum amount on the weeks of severance? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, we do. It varies by industry and company size and so on and so forth. I would actually encourage you to reference the data in the severance report and look at specifically your industry / area to see what those minimums and maximums look like. It does really range. It's hard to give a general. I mean, a most basic we've seen is typically like 2 weeks of severance per year of service, with some other minimum baseline, so on and so forth. But that's a broad generalization, and I would really look at the data that's more specific to your unique situation within your organization.
Great. And we have a question from Deb. She's asking, is it common for employers to subsidize COBRA as part of their severance programs?
I don't know if I'm going to use the word common. I will say there are employers out there who absolutely will subsidize COBRA as part of their severance package. And that sort of ties back into what I was saying around benefits continuation. Some employers do it in the traditional sense of literally benefits continuation. Others do supplement COBRA in lieu of benefits continuation. So ultimately, net, the employee maintains health insurance for a period of time, regardless of the channel by which that happens. But I am seeing that more and more in severance packages, which is a good thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we have this question from Deb. This is a bit newsworthy. There's been a lot of talk about non-competes not being enforceable. Are you seeing non-competes, non-solicitation, non-disparagement language in severance agreements and general releases at this time?
I mean, it's a state-by-state consideration, right? I mean, it's there are states that have outlawed non-competes, and there are states in which they are allowed. And I also see a big difference based on industry, right? There are some industries with IP that is particularly sensitive, et cetera. I do see more of that type of language in those situations where there is a real business risk to employees moving into competitor organizations, having worked within another organization. But as we see, there does seem to be a trend, at least I'm just speaking from a US perspective. Outside of the US, there's different laws around this, but from North America specific, or United States specifically, I am noticing more states considering outlawing the non-compete language. So we'll have to just, I guess all of us will wait and see if that translates into more of the US or stays in a few key states. TBD.
Great. We have one last question about redeployment programs. Nicole asks, do you have any guidance or best practices on redeployment programs?
Yeah, I could do a whole webinar on redeployment programs. So I'll just give a very quick high level, a couple of points on that. Actually, I think we probably have done a few on redeployment programs. If you go to our website, you could probably find some of those. But I mean, first and foremost, you have to start with the culture of the organization. If the culture of the organization is not such that redeployment is something that is accepted and celebrated, the best redeployment program ever will not be successful, because you need to have that baseline of acceptance and celebration that we want to retain talent. We want talent to move within the organization. If you're a manager with an open role, we want to incentivize you to consider internal talent before external talent, because the reality is many managers still today have a preference for external talent over internal talent, right? So first and foremost, you need to have that culture within the organization. Second, you need to create visibility. So if you have really strong workforce planning practices within the organization, hopefully you're able to get well ahead of these reductions in force that need to happen in order to give you enough time to properly execute a redeployment experience for an employee. So it's like those foundational elements. Then it is making sure that you have really forward-looking workforce planning practices, so you know what those impacts might look like. And then I think the third layer, just some basic components that I think any successful redeployment program needs. One is matching to jobs, right? So do you have a system in place where employees who are impacted or are going to be impacted can see what opportunities they match to within the organization? That's table stakes. I'm a big believer in coaching and resume support. We as RiseSmart support several large global organizations in their redeployment programs. And what we found is that when they did it by themselves versus when we supported them and we brought in coaching and resume and some technology, so on and so forth, their redeployment success rates went up by as much as 60% compared to when they were doing it themselves. And I'm a big believer that giving the individuals a leg up in terms of being properly prepared for that internal job search, having a resume that really makes them shine. But more importantly, I think what we see in the data is oftentimes redeployments are not always logical. And what I mean by that is, someone who is in the marketing team is part of a layoff and they redeploy. They're not necessarily redeploying into another marketing role. They're often redeploying into something completely different, because either they had the right skills for that, right? As we're moving into more of a skills economy, this will become easier and easier. They had a network within the organization and were able to navigate that into a new role in a completely different department, so on and so forth. So I think that in order to really be successful at redeployment, in addition to those foundational elements, having each person be able to tap into the expertise of a coach and a resume writer to allow them to navigate the internal employment landscape more effectively, really be clear about their goals and what types of roles they can do, and probably get a little bit more creative than they would on their own, will increase the success rate of redeployment for individuals. So I guess those are sort of three buckets of things, but those are some of the key elements I think you have to have in place for it to work well.
Great. Well, listen, Lindsay, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We did get a couple of questions about industry-specific data. So if you just want to hit once more about how people can access that data, and just a reminder that you will be getting this deck at the end of the presentation. All right. Well, thank you so much. It was great having you, and everybody else, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much.